Welcome to a channel dedicated to narrating history. Our purpose is understanding. We take complex, often contested pasts and present them with clarity, care, and fidelity to the sources. This narration explores history of the Jews in Russia and Poland by Simon Dubnow, a monumental work that traces centuries of Jewish life in Eastern Europe. It is a history shaped by migration and settlement, by faith and learning, by autonomy and restriction, and by constant negotiation with shifting powers. Dubnow writes not as a distant observer, but as a historian determined to preserve memory. Through chronicles, laws, communal records, and lived experience, he reconstructs the political, social, and cultural forces that shaped Jewish communities under Polish and Russian rule. This is not a story of one moment, but of a long continuity, of resilience amid upheaval, and of identity formed under pressure. What follows is a faithful narration of Dubnow's account, presented plainly and without embellishment, allowing the evidence and the historian's voice to speak for themselves. For a direct, authoritative, and documentary approach to history, this is your source. Listen carefully. Follow the record. Follow the story. Chapter 1. The Jewish Diaspora in Eastern Europe. The Jewish settlements on the shores of the Black Sea. When we look back into the depths of ancient history, the story of the Jewish diaspora in Eastern Europe stands beside that of Western Europe in age, even if it never equaled it in size or cultural influence. In fact, it is entirely possible that Jews reached the eastern regions of Europe even earlier than they reached the West. The paths of migration were different. Western Europe received its Jewish population largely through the expansion of the Roman Empire, which inherited the power and culture of ancient Greece. Eastern Europe, by contrast, opened its doors much earlier, beginning with the conquests of Alexander the Great, and drew its immigrants directly from the Hellenized lands of Asia. Among the oldest Jewish settlements in Eastern Europe, none are more striking than those established along the northern shores of the Black Sea, territories that in later centuries would become part of the Russian Empire. These lands, distant and windswept, already carried the weight of ancient civilizations long before Rome reached its height. Far back in antiquity, Greek settlers from Asia Minor and the Ionian Islands were drawn northward toward the Black Sea, known in the ancient world as the Pontus Euxinus. They were attracted by the fertile lands of Taurus, a region that corresponds to the present-day Crimean Peninsula. Beginning in the 6th century before the Common Era, these Greeks founded colonies along the coast. From there, they shipped vast quantities of grain back to their homeland in Greece, turning Taurus into a vital economic outpost of the Greek world. History then took a decisive turn. After the military campaigns of Alexander the Great in the 4th century before the Common Era, the land of Judea became part of the vast Hellenistic world. From this moment began what later generations would call the Great Diaspora. Jewish communities spread throughout the realms ruled by the Seleucid and Ptolemaic dynasties, reaching across Syria, Egypt, and Asia Minor. It is almost certain that one branch of this expanding Jewish population traveled even farther, following Greek trade routes to the distant shores of Taurus. The Jews who journeyed there did not arrive in isolation. They followed the Greeks, moving from Asia Minor, a patchwork of regions and cities such as Cilicia, Galatia, Miletus, Ephesus, Sardis, and Tarsus. By the beginning of the Christian era, these cities already housed strong and influential Jewish communities, many of which would later become the earliest centers of Christianity. By the 1st century of the Christian era, a time when Roman power had fully consolidated its rule over the Hellenized East, Jewish communities in the Greek colonies of Taurus were no longer small or scattered. They were organized, stable, and deeply rooted, clear descendants of an even older wave of settlement. During this same period, the Crimea and the neighboring shores of the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov, known to the Greeks as Pontus and Maeotis, were dotted with small Greek city republics. These cities rose among the lands of the Scythians, the Sarmatians, and the Taurians, peoples often portrayed by Greek writers as fierce and untamed. Among these city-states were Cimmerian Bosporus, also called Panicapaeum, located at what is now the city of Kerch, Phanagoria on the Taman Peninsula, Albia, Gorgipia, now known as Anapa, and several others. The most powerful and active of these cities was Bosporus Panacapaeum, strategically positioned at the meeting point of the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. Its rulers, known as kings or archons, belonged to the Greek dynasty of the Rescuperites. Though Greek by culture, they acknowledged the supreme authority of Rome. In formal inscriptions, they proudly styled themselves friends of the Caesars and the Romans, often adding the Roman dynastic name Tiberius Julius to emphasize their loyalty to the imperial house. The immense reach of Roman power during this era is vividly described by the Jewish historian Josephus Flavius. Writing shortly after the destruction of Judea, around the year 80 of the Christian era, he spoke of Rome's control even over distant and turbulent regions. He mentioned the peoples of the Heniochi, the Colchians, the Taurians, and those living around the Bosporus, Pontus, and Maeotis. These lands, once dangerous and nearly unnavigable, were now held in check by a mere 3,000 Roman soldiers and 40 long warships, which kept the stormy seas under imperial control. It is from almost this same moment in history, around the years 80 and 81 of the Christian era, that extraordinary archaeological evidence emerges. Greek inscriptions discovered in the soil of ancient Bosporus and Taurus testify unmistakably to the presence of a well-organized Jewish community, complete with a house of prayer. One such inscription, engraved on a marble tablet and preserved today in the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, offers a rare and intimate glimpse into Jewish life on the edge of the ancient world. The inscription dates to the reign of King Tiberius Julius Rescuperides, the devout ally of the Caesars and the Romans. It records an event that took place in the year 377 according to the local Bosporan calendar, on the 12th day of the month called Parisios. A woman named Cresta, formerly the wife of a man named Drusus, publicly declares in the house of prayer that her foster son, Heracles, is set free forever. She binds this act with a solemn vow, stating that no heir may seize or trouble him, and that he is free to go wherever he wishes, without obstacle or restraint. Only one obligation remains. He must continue to visit the house of prayer for worship and faithful attendance. This declaration is made with the consent of her heirs, Iphicleides and Heliconias, and with the formal participation of the Jewish synagogue, which assumes a role of guardianship over the freedman. This inscription, along with others from the same period, reveals a powerful custom. The act of freeing a slave was carried out publicly, within the Jewish house of prayer, and under the authority of the community itself. Freedom was not merely a private agreement. It was a sacred and communal act, witnessed and protected by religious institutions. From these inscriptions, several striking conclusions emerge. The Jewish community of Taurian Bosporus consisted of Jews who had adopted Greek language and culture. They wrote their legal and religious documents in Greek and bore Greek names such as Cresta, Drusus, Heracles, and Artemisia. Yet beneath this cultural adaptation lay an unbreakable religious unity. Even a freed slave was bound by obligation to attend the house of prayer, showing how central faith remained to communal identity. Moreover, the Jewish community exercised a measure of civil autonomy. It functioned as a legal body, capable of acting collectively and serving as guardian in matters of law. It is reasonable to assume that similar Jewish communities existed in other Greek colonies of Taurus. Their numbers were continually reinforced by new arrivals from Asia Minor, from Syria, and from Egypt, especially from the great Hellenistic center of Alexandria. The fact that these communities appear so well organized in the first century of the Christian era suggests that they were preceded by earlier, more modest stages of settlement. Small trading posts, scattered households, and fragile beginnings that slowly grew into established institutions. From the early centuries of the Christian era come additional traces of Jewish life in the region. Tombstones bearing the image of the holy seven-branched candlestick, the menorah, have been found across Taurus and the lands around the Sea of Azov. Other inscriptions speak of people described as those who fear God the Most High, a phrase commonly used in the Greco-Roman world to describe pagans who stood halfway between traditional polytheism and the faith of Judaism or early Christianity. The Judeo-Hellenistic diaspora along the northern shores of the Black Sea did not remain religiously isolated. Like its parent communities in Asia Minor, it became a center of Christian missionary activity. By the end of the 3rd century of the Christian era, Christian bishops wielded significant authority in the city of Chersonesus, near what is now Sevastopol. This growing power did not go unchallenged. It provoked resistance among the pagan population, leading to open rebellion. The tension between old beliefs and new faiths erupted violently, as recorded in the lives of the Christian martyrs Basil and Capiton. On the 6th day of December in the year 300 of the Christian era, the pagan inhabitants rose in revolt against these two figures, and the fragile balance of belief along the Black Sea shore shattered once more. The revolt did not stop with the bishops alone. The fury of the pagan uprising turned equally against their fellow missionaries, men who had come with words instead of weapons. In the chaos that followed, another group was drawn into the storm. The Jews, long established in these lands, found themselves suddenly targeted as well. It appears that the most zealous followers of the new Christian faith had attempted to pull the Jews into the embrace of the church by forceful persuasion. Instead of winning converts, they ignited resistance. Old alliances shattered, and long-standing coexistence gave way to suspicion and violence. The fragile balance among pagans, Christians, and Jews collapsed in bloodshed. The presence of Jewish settlements in the Bosporan Kingdom was not unknown to the wider world. Even in distant Palestine, at the close of the 4th century of the Christian era, knowledge of these communities had spread. Jerome, one of the most influential fathers of the Christian Church, was aware of them. Living far from the Black Sea, he nevertheless learned of the Jews of Taurus through his own Jewish teacher. Interpreting the words of the prophet Obadiah, who spoke of the captivity of Jerusalem in a place called Sepharad, Jerome identified that mysterious name with the Taurian Bosporus. In his eyes, this remote coastal region represented the farthest edge of the Jewish diaspora, a place where exile had reached its most distant limit. When the Roman Empire was divided into two halves, east and west, the Greek and Jewish colonies along the Black Sea were naturally drawn into the orbit of the Eastern Empire, later known as Byzantium. Its capital, Constantinople, lay directly across the waters of the Black Sea, a constant presence on the horizon. Trade bound the Taurian colonies ever more tightly to this imperial center. Goods, ships, and merchants flowed back and forth, and in this bustling exchange the Jews competed side by side with the Greeks, playing an energetic role in commerce and finance. Yet the closeness to Byzantium brought danger as well as opportunity. During the 5th and 6th centuries of the Christian era, the Church of Byzantium grew increasingly militant. Under emperors such as Theodosius II, Zeno, and Justinian, religious persecution intensified. Laws and decrees pressed harshly upon Jewish communities in the ancient provinces of the empire. Driven by these pressures, many Jews fled from the heartlands of Byzantium toward its margins. The colonies of Taurus, distant from the imperial capital, yet still connected by trade, became places of refuge. By the 8th century of the Christian era, the Jewish population in these Black Sea colonies had grown so large that contemporary chroniclers could not ignore it. The Byzantine historian Theophanes wrote that in Phanagoria and the surrounding region, Jews stood at the forefront of the population, surrounded by many other tribes. His words paint a picture of Jewish communities no longer hidden or marginal, but prominent and visible, woven into the fabric of regional life. These same colonies were repeatedly visited by Christian missionaries. Their goal was to convert the local peoples to Christianity and, along the way, to win over the Jews as well. The patriarchs of Constantinople held out hope that the people of the Old Testament might yet be gathered into the fold of the New. One of these leaders, the Patriarch Photius of the 9th century, wrote directly to the Bishop of Bosporus, located in what is now the city of Kerch. In his letter, Photius expressed heartfelt longing. If only the bishop could capture the Judeans there and secure their obedience to Christ, Photius wrote, he would rejoice with his whole soul at the fulfillment of such beautiful hopes. But those hopes were frustrated. The Jews did not yield to the missionaries' efforts. More than that, they actively resisted, and in doing so, they weakened the Christian mission among the pagans as well. Even the most celebrated missionaries of Byzantium, the brothers Cyril and Methodius, encountered fierce opposition. Time and again, they clashed with what Christian sources described as the Judeans who blasphemed the Christian faith. Church legends boast that through prayer and eloquence, around the year 860 of the Christian era, the Holy Brothers defeated the Jews in public disputations and put them to shame. Behind this triumphal language, however, one senses the intensity of the struggle and the stubborn strength of Jewish resistance. At the heart of this conflict lay a greater prize. The true object of rivalry between Jewish teachers and Christian missionaries was not merely the Greek cities of the Black Sea, but a powerful and mysterious nation rising to the north and east, the Khazars. While Byzantium pressed upon the Black Sea colonies from the west, striving to draw them and the neighboring Slavic lands into Christian civilization, a new force surged from the east. From the regions of the Caucasus Mountains and the Caspian Sea came the Khazars, also known as the Khazars. Originally a mixture of Finno-Turkish tribes, the Khazars emerged during the Great Migration period, when entire peoples were on the move across Eurasia. Fierce and warlike, they appeared in the Caucasus and began launching raids against the Persian Empire ruled by the Sassanid dynasty, often acting as instruments of Byzantine strategy against Persia. The rise of the great Arabic conquests in the 7th century of the Christian era changed everything. The emergence of a powerful Islamic caliphate blocked the Khazars' expansion toward the east and forced them to turn westward instead. They pushed toward the shores of the Caspian Sea, the mouths of the Volga and Don rivers, the Byzantine colonies along the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov, and above all, the fertile and prosperous land of Taurus. At the mouth of the Volga River, where its vast waters empty into the Caspian Sea near what is now the city of Astrakhan, the Khazars established a kingdom. Its capital was called Idil, a name that originally belonged to the Volga River itself. From this stronghold, the Khazars launched relentless raids against nearby Slavic tribes, extending their power as far as the gates of Kiev. Many peoples were forced to pay tribute, acknowledging Khazar dominance. Another important Khazar center arose in the Crimea itself, amid Greek and Jewish populations loyal to Byzantium. From there, the Khazars pushed westward toward Byzantium and the Balkan Peninsula, posing a serious threat to the Eastern Roman Empire. In response, Byzantine emperors often chose diplomacy over war. They forged alliances with the Khazar rulers, known as Khagans, seeking to restrain their energy through gifts, concessions, and tribute. In Constantinople, a hopeful illusion took root. Church leaders and imperial officials believed that, in the end, the Khazars could be conquered not by arms, but by faith. If only they could be converted to Christianity, the struggle would be won. Missionaries were sent northward, and local bishops in Taurus labored tirelessly toward the same goal. But they soon discovered that they faced a formidable rival. Judaism, already deeply rooted in the Black Sea colonies and supported by learned leaders from Babylonia, gained a powerful hold over a significant portion of the Khazar nation. While still pagan, the Khazars stood at the crossroads of three great religions. From the south came Islam, advancing with the strength of the Arabic Caliphate. From the southwest came Christianity, spreading outward from Byzantium. And from within the Caliphate itself, yet reaching far beyond its borders, came Judaism, guided by the exilarchs and Jaons of Babylonia, and sustained by Jewish communities scattered throughout Byzantine lands and along the Black Sea. Both Arabs and Byzantines succeeded in converting parts of the Khazar population to Islam and Christianity. But the greatest victory belonged to Judaism. It gained the allegiance not merely of common people, but of the royal dynasty and the ruling elite. According to Jewish tradition and the accounts of medieval Arabic travelers, The decisive moment came around the year 740 of the Christian era. The Khazar king, or Khagan, named Bulin, resolved to abandon paganism. Yet he hesitated, uncertain which faith to embrace. Envoys from the Islamic Caliphate urged him to accept Islam. Messengers from Byzantium pressed him toward Christianity. Representatives of Judaism defended their own ancient faith. Unable to decide, Bulin summoned the champions of all three religions to a public disputation before his throne. The arguments were fierce and the refutations sharp, but the king remained unconvinced. Then he chose another path. He summoned first the Christian teacher and asked him privately which religion he considered superior, Judaism or Islam. The answer was clear: Judaism, because it was older and formed the foundation of all religions. Next, Bulin questioned the Muslim teacher, asking which faith he preferred, Judaism or Christianity. He received the same reply, for the same reason. The king drew his conclusion with cold logic. If both the Christian and the Muslim acknowledged the superiority of Judaism over the faith of their rival, then Judaism, he declared, was the faith he would choose. Bulin embraced Judaism, and many nobles followed their ruler's example. Jewish sources recount that one of Bulin's descendants, the Khagan Obadiah, became an especially devoted supporter of the Jewish religion. He invited Jewish scholars, possibly from Babylonia, to instruct the Khazars in the Hebrew Bible and the Talmud. Synagogues were built, and regular divine services were established, anchoring Jewish life in the heart of the Khazar state. During the 9th and 10th centuries of the Christian era, the Khazar kingdom reached the height of its power and prosperity. Ruled by monarchs who professed Judaism, it astonished the medieval world. Arabic writers describe a society marked by remarkable religious tolerance. The king and ruling classes followed Judaism, but among the common people one could find Muslims, Christians, Jews, and many pagans living side by side. This tolerance was reflected even in the administration of justice. The Khagan appointed 7 judges, according to some sources 9. 2 judged cases for followers of Judaism, 2 for Christians, 2 for Muslims, and 1 for pagans, including Slavs, Russians, and other peoples. Despite the Jewish faith of the rulers, equality among religions was largely maintained. Only on rare occasions did the Khazar king display intolerance. Around the year 921 of the Christian era, news reached him that Muslims had destroyed a synagogue in a distant land called Babunj. In anger, the Khagan ordered the destruction of a mosque's tower and the execution of its muezzins, the men who called the faithful to prayer. He explained his restraint in chilling words. He would have destroyed the entire mosque, he said, had he not feared that such an act would lead to the destruction of every synagogue in Muslim lands. Situated between the Caliphate of Baghdad and the Byzantine Empire, the Khazar kingdom occupied a strategic crossroads of the ancient world. Jews played a crucial role in its economy. During the 9th and 10th centuries, one of the great trade routes linking Asia, Europe, and Africa passed through Khazar territory. The Arabic geographer Ibn Qurtuba wrote of Jewish merchants who spoke many languages and traveled endlessly, from west to east and from east to west, by land and by sea. One overland route led from Persia and the Caucasus through the lands of the Slavs, past the Khazar capital near the mouth of the Volga River, and across the Caspian Sea. Another Arabic writer, Ibn Faqih, writing shortly after the year 900, noted that along the route used by Slavic merchants trading between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea stood a Jewish city named Samkers. Located on the Taman Peninsula near the Crimea, this city stood as living proof of the deep and lasting Jewish presence along the shores of the Black Sea. During this age of Khazar strength and prosperity, a new wave of Jewish life poured into the kingdom from the west. In the Empire of Byzantium, dark days had fallen upon the Jews. Under Emperor Basil, called the Macedonian, who ruled from the year 867 to the year 886 of the Christian era, persecution swept through Jewish communities. Jews were forced to accept Christianity against their will, and hundreds of ancient congregations were shattered and destroyed. Homes were abandoned, synagogues silenced, and families scattered. Faced with this storm, many Jews looked northward and eastward toward a land where their faith was not merely tolerated, but honored at the highest level of power. The kingdom of the Khazars, where Judaism was the religion of the government and the royal court, shone like a beacon of refuge. Although Christians, Muslims, and pagans all enjoyed equal protection under the law, the presence of a Jewish ruler gave hope and security to those fleeing oppression. Naturally, the persecuted Jews of Byzantium made their way toward this distant sanctuary. An Arabic writer of great renown, Masudi, records this movement of people with striking clarity. Writing in the middle of the 10th century, he describes the capital of the Khazars as a city of many faiths. Muslims, Christians, Jews, and pagans all lived within its walls. The king, his court, and the entire Khazar ruling tribe professed the Jewish religion, which had been the dominant faith of the land since the time of the Caliph Harun al-Rashid, who reigned at the end of the 8th century. Masudi explains that many Jews who settled among the Khazars came from cities throughout the Muslim world and from the lands of Byzantium. The reason, he states plainly, was persecution. The ruler of Byzantium had oppressed the Jews in order to force them to adopt Christianity, and as a result, great numbers fled the land of Byzantium and departed for the Khazar kingdom. This testimony dates from the year 954 of the Christian era. Almost at the same time, an extraordinary exchange of letters was taking place between two distant Jewish leaders, separated by thousands of miles but united by hope. One was Joseph, the Khagan, or king, of the Khazars. The other was Hasdai ibn Shaprat, a Jewish statesman serving at the court of the Muslim Caliphate in Cordova, in what is now Spain. Hasdai ibn Shaprat held a position of great influence under Caliph Abd al-Rahman III. As a trusted official, he maintained diplomatic relations with the emperors of Byzantium and with rulers across Asia and Europe. Through Persian and Byzantine ambassadors, he heard astonishing reports of a kingdom far away, beyond the seas, where a Jew sat upon the throne and where Judaism was the religion of the state. The news filled Hasdai with wonder and joy. To him, it seemed that he had uncovered the truth behind ancient legends of a lost Jewish kingdom. His heart burned with the desire to make contact with this land of Khazaria. If the rumors proved true, he was prepared to abandon his position of honor, leave his family, and devote his talents and authority entirely to the service of his fellow Jews in this distant realm. Hasdai began making careful inquiries. Slowly, fragments of information reached him. The land of the Khazars lay 15 days' journey by sea from Constantinople. It maintained commercial ties with Byzantium. Its present ruler was named Joseph. The safest route for sending a message, he learned, ran through the lands of Hungary, Bulgaria, and Russia. Attempt after attempt failed. Messengers vanished. Letters went unanswered. At last, after persistent effort, Hasdai succeeded. Around the year 955 of the Christian era, an elaborate letter written in Hebrew was delivered into the hands of King Joseph. In his epistle, Hasdai first described himself and his role at the court of Cordova. Then his words turned urgent and deeply personal. He begged the king of the Khazars to tell him, in full detail, about the origin and present condition of this Jewish kingdom. He longed to know whether there truly existed anywhere on earth a land and a kingdom where the scattered people of Israel were not subject to the rule of others. Hasdai poured out his soul. If he could know that such a kingdom truly existed, he wrote, he would renounce his honors, abandon his high rank, and leave his family behind. He would cross mountains and seas, traveling by land and water, until he reached the dwelling place of his Lord and Sovereign. There, he longed to behold the greatness of the king, the order of his servants, the tranquility enjoyed by the remnant of Israel. For centuries, Hasdai lamented, the Jews had been cast down from their former glory and forced to live in exile. Again and again, other nations mocked them, saying, every people has its own kingdom, but you have none. Yet the rumor of a Jewish king and a powerful Jewish realm had lifted their spirits. Heads were raised. Strength returned to weary hands. If only the rumor were true, Hasdai wrote, then Jewish dignity itself would be restored. After long and painful waiting, the reply finally arrived. King Joseph of the Khazars answered with dignity and detail. He described the mixed composition of his people and the many religions practiced within his realm. He told how King Bulin and the princes of old had tested the claims of the rival faiths and had chosen Judaism. He listed the rulers who followed, kings who upheld the Jewish religion with zeal: Obadiah, Hezekiah, Manasseh, Hanukkah, Isaac, Zebulun, Moses, also known as Manasseh II, Nissi, Aaron, Menahem, Benjamin, Aaron II, and finally himself, Joseph, son of the last king. Joseph described his land. His residence, he wrote, stood at the mouth of the river Idil, known to others as the Volga River, where it flows into the Caspian Sea. The river stretched eastward for a journey of 4 months. Along its banks lived many nations, in towns and villages, both open and fortified. He named them one by one: the Burdas, the Bulgar, the Suvar, the Arisu, the Zarmas, the Venentit, the Sever, and the Slavian. All were numerous, and all paid him tribute. He went on to describe the borders of his power. To the south lay cities such as Semender and Bakhtadlud, reaching to the gates of Bab al-Abwab, the great passage on the Caspian coast. To the west lay Sarkel, Samkerts, Kurtz, Sugdai, and many other settlements along the shores of the Black Sea, which he called the Sea of Constantinople. These lands, scattered over a distance of 4 months' journey, were all subject to his rule. King Joseph then spoke of war and vigilance. With the help of the Almighty, he guarded the mouth of the Volga River, preventing the Russians from sailing through into the Caspian Sea to attack the lands of the Muslims. On land as well, he held back enemies from reaching the gates of Bab al-Abwab. If he were to allow these foes to pass even once, he warned, they would devastate the Muslim lands as far as Baghdad itself. His letter then turned solemn and prayerful. Though far from Zion, he wrote, his eyes were turned toward God and toward the wise men of Israel who led the academies of Jerusalem and Babylonia. Confusion reigned concerning the coming of the Messiah, and certainty had been lost. He prayed that the Lord would act for the sake of his great name, that the destruction of the temple and the suffering of Israel would not be forgotten, and that the words of the prophet would be fulfilled, promising the sudden return of the Lord to his temple. He ended with a plea that God would hasten redemption and gather all the exiled people of Israel in his lifetime, in Hastai's lifetime, and in the lifetime of all who loved his name. These closing lines, heavy with longing and sorrow, have caused later scholars to question whether portions of the letters reflect not the 10th century, but the mournful messianic spirit of the 16th century, when the correspondence was rediscovered by Spanish Jewish exiles in Constantinople. Yet despite these doubts, the core of King Joseph's account aligns so closely with contemporary Arabic sources that the essential truth of the correspondence stands firm. Joseph's letter likely reached Spain around the year 960 of the Christian era. Only a few years later, catastrophe struck. The fears he had expressed concerning the Russians were swiftly fulfilled. The Slavic tribes, now united under powerful Russian princes, threw off the authority of the Khazars. No longer content with independence, they carried war into the heart of Khazaria itself. Prince Sviatoslav of Kiev led devastating campaigns between the years 966 and 969. He ravaged the Khazar territories along the Volga River, destroyed their capital, and drove the Khazars from the Caspian region. The once mighty kingdom collapsed. The survivors withdrew westward, establishing themselves on the shores of the Black Sea, especially on the Crimean Peninsula, which for a long time continued to bear the name Khazaria. This reduced Khazar realm, a shadow of its former power, survived for nearly 50 years. In the early 11th century, around the year 1016 of the Christian era, it fell at last to combined Russian and Byzantine forces. According to tradition, the relatives of the final Khagan fled westward to join their fellow Jews in Spain. The Khazar people themselves were scattered and gradually vanished among other nations. Those Khazars in the Crimea who had embraced Judaism were likely absorbed into the local Jewish population, which included both Rabbinite Jews, who followed the Talmudic tradition, and Karaites, who rejected rabbinic authority. As a result, the ancient Jewish settlements of the Crimean Peninsula suddenly grew in number and strength. At the same time, Jewish migration from Byzantium to the northern shores of the Black Sea continued. Many of these immigrants were Karaites, who were numerous within the Byzantine Empire. Even after the fall of the Khazars, new nomadic powers, such as the Pecheneg and later the Palavcians, ruled the Taurian region. Yet these upheavals failed to erase the ancient traditions of the land. As late as the 12th century, the name Khazaria still appeared in contemporary documents. Around the year 1175, the traveler Pethahiah of Ratisbon journeyed through these regions. He visited what he called the land of the Kedars and the land of the Khazars, separated by a narrow tongue of sea. By this, he meant the mainland of Taurus, roamed by the nomadic Palavcians, and the Crimean Peninsula, divided by the Gulf of Perekop and the narrow isthmus of the same name. In the land of the Kedars, Pethahiah did not encounter Jews of the traditional kind. Instead, he found sectarians, whom he called minim, heretics. They rejected the traditions of the sages, ate their Sabbath meal in darkness, knew nothing of the Talmudic blessings and prayers, and had scarcely even heard of the Talmud itself. In these strange practices, the traveler was clearly describing the Karaites. With the rise of the Russian Principality of Kiev, a new chapter quietly opened in the long journey of the Jewish people. Kiev, receiving its religious structure from Byzantine monks and priests, was growing into a political and spiritual center. As it expanded, it drew people from many lands, and among them came Jewish settlers. They arrived not only from the remnants of Khazaria and from the Crimean Peninsula, but also from the Byzantine Empire itself, traveling alongside Greek merchants and craftsmen. These newcomers helped awaken the commercial life of the young principality, linking a still primitive Slavic region to the wider networks of trade, learning, and civilization that stretched across Europe and the Near East. Yet from the very beginning, their presence was framed by suspicion and legend. An old story preserved in the earliest Russian chronicles, colored heavily by Byzantine church ideology, places the Jews at the heart of a dramatic religious contest. According to this legend, in the year 986, Prince Vladimir of Kiev summoned representatives of different faiths to test their beliefs, as he prepared to abandon pagan worship and choose a new religion for his people. The tale recounts that among those who came before him were Jews from the Khazar lands. They addressed the prince boldly, saying that Christians worshipped one who had been crucified, while they worshipped the one true God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Vladimir questioned them closely. What laws did they follow? They answered that their law commanded circumcision, forbade the eating of pork and game, and required strict observance of the Sabbath day. Then Vladimir asked a question that cut deeper than doctrine. Where was their homeland? In Jerusalem, they replied. But do you live there? The prince pressed. No, they said, for the Lord was angry with our ancestors and scattered us across the earth for our sins. Our land was given to the Christians. At this, Vladimir's judgment was swift and merciless. How, he asked, could a people rejected by their own God presume to teach others? If God had loved them, they would not wander in exile. Was he expected to invite the same punishment upon his own land? Historically, this legend tells us less about the Jews themselves and more about the fierce religious and political struggle of the age. The true battlefield lay farther south, in Taurian Chersonesus, a region long contested by Jewish and Byzantine influence. There, the forces that would bind pagan Russia to Byzantium were quietly at work. Any attempt by Khazarian or Crimean Jews to shape the religious destiny of Kiev was doomed. Political and economic necessity was pushing Kiev and Byzantium together, and by the end of the 10th century this alliance was sealed by the conversion of Russia to Greek Orthodox Christianity. The consequences were profound. United, Byzantium and Kiev struck down their shared rival, the Khazar state, which for centuries had contested Byzantine power along the Black Sea while holding Slavic tribes in subjection. With the fall of the Khazars, part of the Jewish population of Taurus migrated northward, settling in Kiev itself. This moment marked a grim pattern that would repeat across centuries. From the very dawn of Russian cultural life, attitudes toward Jews were shaped by Byzantine religious intolerance. The teachings of influential church leaders reinforced this hostility. Theodosius, abbot of the famous Petra monastery in Kiev between the years 1057 and 1074, preached peace with neighbors and enemies alike, but only with human enemies, not with what he called the enemies of God. Those enemies, he declared, were Jews and heretics, followers of what he described as a twisted faith. According to the life of Theodosius, written by the chronicler Nestor, the abbot would rise in the dead of night and secretly visit Jewish quarters, not to seek understanding, but to argue and provoke. He insulted them openly, calling them godless, deliberately stirring anger in the hope that they might kill him, granting him the martyrdom he desired. The Jews, it seems, denied him even that satisfaction. Similar hostility echoed from other prominent figures of the time, including Ilarion and John, metropolitans of Kiev in the mid and late 11th century. Words soon turned into violence. In the early 12th century, the Jewish community of Kiev suffered its first recorded pogrom. Under Grand Duke Svitopolk II, who ruled from 1093 to 1113, Jews had enjoyed relative security. They traded freely, engaged in commerce, and some were even entrusted with collecting customs and taxes on behalf of the prince. But after Svitopolk's death, during the unstable interregnum that followed, this protection vanished overnight. The citizens of Kiev invited Vladimir Monomakh to take the throne, but his delayed arrival proved disastrous. Riots erupted. The mob first attacked the homes of government officials, then turned its fury on the Jews, looting their houses and seizing their property. Alarmed citizens sent urgent warnings to Monomakh, fearing the violence would spiral out of control. Only when he finally entered the city was order restored. Despite this bloodshed, Jewish life in Kiev endured. In the year 1124, a devastating fire ravaged large parts of the city, and Jewish quarters suffered heavily. Yet the chronicles of the mid-12th century still speak of the Jewish Gate of Kiev, a sign of a community firmly rooted in the city's life. Kiev had become a vital commercial hub, connecting Western Europe with the Black Sea and the vast Asian interior. Jewish travelers of the era took note. Benjamin of Tudela described the Kingdom of Russia as stretching from the gates of Prague to the gates of Kiev, calling Kiev a great city on the frontier of the realm. Another traveler, Pethahiah of Ratisbon, traced his journey from Germany through Prague into Poland and onward to Kiev. From there, he traveled 6 days to the Dnieper River, crossed it, and continued south to the Black Sea and the Crimea. After the Crusades, new waves of Jewish immigrants from German lands settled in Poland, and some moved farther east into the Kievan Principality. German rabbis of the 12th century mentioned journeys to Russia and the Slavic lands, undertaken by Jewish merchants. Lacking great rabbinical authorities of their own, Russian Jews sought guidance from scholars in Germany or sent their brightest students westward to study the Talmud. Hebrew sources preserve the names of learned men, such as Rabbi Isaac of Chernihiv and Rabbi Moses of Kiev, the latter corresponding with the renowned Jain Samuel ben Ali of Baghdad. Then came the thunder of conquest. In the 13th century, Tatar Khans overran the Crimean Peninsula and gradually extended their dominion over Kiev and Moscow. This reunited the ancient Jewish center of Taurus with its northern offshoots. Trade flowed steadily between Kiev and Kaffa, also known as Theodosia, a bustling Crimean port that had become an international marketplace under Genoese rule. The Genoese Republic, having secured trading privileges from the Tatar Khans, transformed Kaffa into a cosmopolitan hub. Ships sailed constantly between Genoa and the Black Sea, passing through the Byzantine Straits. Italians, Greeks, Armenians, and Jews crowded the city. Genoese officials were repeatedly instructed to uphold religious tolerance among this diverse population. A traveler named Schiltberger, visiting between the years 1394 and 1427, reported that Kaffa housed Jews of two traditions, Rabbanides and Karaites, who maintained two synagogues and inhabited some 4,000 houses. But this fragile world was not destined to last. When Constantinople fell to the Turks, the Genoese position in the Black Sea weakened. In 1455, Genoa transferred control of Kaffa to the Bank of St. George. Even this could not save the colony. In 1475, Ottoman forces captured Kaffa, and the entire Crimean peninsula fell under Turco-Tatar rule. Elsewhere in Crimea, Jewish life persisted and adapted. In the old Tatar capital of Sokat, now called Eski Karawan, Rabbinite and Karaite communities flourished as early as the 13th century. Later, near the new capital of Bakhchisarai, the Karaite stronghold of Chufit Kale, meaning Rock of the Jews, grew in prominence. Its vast cemetery, filled with tombstones dating from the 13th to the 18th century, stands as silent testimony to centuries of continuous life. From Crimea, Jewish settlers moved north again, this time into Lithuania. By the late 14th century, Grand Duke Vitovt placed them under his protection. Communities sprang up in towns such as Troki and Lutsk, where they would later receive significant privileges. When Ottoman rule over Crimea began in 1475 and lasted until 1783, trade between Crimean Jews and the Principality of Moscow intensified. Moscow, fiercely isolated and deeply suspicious of foreigners, allowed almost no outsiders within its borders. Non-Christians were branded infidels and labeled baserments. Yet necessity forced exceptions. In the late 15th century, Grand Duke Ivan III of Muscovy relied on Crimean Jews in delicate negotiations with Khan Mumli-Giri of the Crimea. One such agent was Koza Kakas of Kaffa, whose efforts helped forge a military alliance between the two rulers between the years 1472 and 1475. Kakas wrote his letters in Hebrew, a language unknown in Moscow, forcing Ivan to ask that future correspondence be written in Russian or in the language of the Tatars, or perhaps Italian. Another key figure was Zechariah Gizolfi, an Italian Jew and former Genoese official, who ruled the Taman Peninsula and maintained close ties with the Crimean Khan. For years, from 1484 to 1500, he served as a diplomatic intermediary with Moscow and nearly settled there permanently. At the same time, fear and superstition were spreading. In Novgorod and Moscow, a clandestine religious movement emerged, later branded the Judaizing heresy. Its alleged founder was a learned Jew named Skaria, who had migrated from Kiev to Novgorod, exploiting existing religious unrest, fueled by sects that rejected church rituals and even denied the divinity of Christ. Skaria attracted members of the Orthodox clergy. Some priests followed him to Moscow in the year 1480, converting others along the way. Even members of the nobility and the Grand Ducal Court, including Ivan's own daughter-in-law Helena, were drawn into the movement. The reaction was brutal. Church leaders, led by Archbishop Hennadius of Novgorod, sounded the alarm. After years of struggle, a church council in 1504 condemned the movement. Supported by Ivan III, the leaders were burned at the stake. Others were imprisoned or exiled to monasteries. The heresy was crushed. Fear did not fade. Around the same time, Ivan's court physician, a Jewish doctor named Master Leon from Venice, treated the gravely ill heir to the throne. Confident, perhaps recklessly so, he promised to cure the prince or face death. When a young man died on March 15th, 1490, Ivan kept his word. After the 40 days of mourning, Master Leon was publicly executed in Moscow. To the Muscovite mind, learned Jews were no scholars or physicians. They were sorcerers, wielders of dark arts. As long as such beliefs ruled, Jews could not hope for a place in Muscovy. They would come only as passing merchants, tolerated briefly, watched closely, and sent away as soon as their usefulness ended. History of the Jews in Russia and Poland by Simon Dubnow, Chapter 2, Jewish Presence in Poland. What you have heard so far is the long prelude to a much larger story. We have followed the earliest paths of Jewish settlement into Eastern Europe, beginning along the northern shores of the Black Sea, where Jewish communities took root within the Greek world, preserved their faith, and built organized communal life at the edge of antiquity. We have seen how these settlements endured through Roman and Byzantine rule, how they became centers of trade, learning, and resistance, and how they stood at the crossroads of paganism, Christianity, and Judaism. We have traced the rise of the Khazar kingdom, a rare and striking moment in history when a powerful state adopted Judaism and offered refuge to persecuted Jews from Byzantium and beyond. For a time, Khazaria stood as a living answer to exile, a Jewish-ruled realm bound into the great commercial networks of Eurasia. We have also witnessed its fall, crushed by the growing power of the Rus, and the dispersal of its people into Crimea, Kiev, and neighboring lands. From there, the narrative carried us into the early history of Kievan Rus, where Jewish settlers contributed to commerce and urban life, yet faced increasing hostility shaped by Byzantine religious ideology. Legends, church teachings, and political alliances hardened suspicion into violence, giving rise to the first pogroms and setting patterns that would echo for centuries. We have seen Jewish life persist through fire, conquest, and migration, under Tatar Khans, Genoese merchants, Ottoman rulers, and Lithuanian princes, while Muscovy emerged as a land closed to Jews, marked by fear, intolerance, and repression. Here, at this point in the record, the foundations are laid. The ancient Black Sea world is fading. New powers are rising. Jewish communities are shifting north and west, into Poland, Lithuania, and the lands that will soon dominate Eastern Europe. From here, the story continues, not as a beginning, but as a turning point. The story now turns westward. Chapter 2, Jewish Presence in Poland. While Jewish life along the shores of the Black Sea had grown out of the Greek, Byzantine, and Islamic worlds, the Jewish presence in Poland followed a very different path. Here, the settlers came not from the East, but from Western Europe, from the lands shaped by German culture and the Latin Christian Church. This division was not accidental. It reflected the deeper pull of history itself. The Slavic lands of Russia leaned toward the east, toward Byzantium and the steppe. Poland, by contrast, turned steadily toward the west. Long before Poland formally entered the Christian world, it had already become a commercial extension of Germany. The river valleys of the Varda and the Vistula lay closest to Western Europe, and merchants moved along them naturally. For Jewish traders, whose livelihoods depended on long-distance exchange, these routes were irresistible. As early as the 9th century of the Christian era, Jews living in the German provinces of the empire founded by Charlemagne were trading with neighboring Slavic lands. They crossed borders with their goods, visited Polish settlements, and in time, some of these temporary journeys became permanent homes. From this shadowy early period, no firm records survive. Instead, what has reached us are legends, blurred reflections of memory rather than reliable history. One such legend tells of a dramatic moment in the middle of the 9th century. After the death of Prince Popiel, the Poles gathered in Kruszwica, their ancient capital, to choose a new ruler. Unable to agree, they decided to leave the choice to fate. The first man to enter the town the next morning would become prince. At dawn, the gates opened, and the first to walk in was a Jew named Abraham Prokopnik. Seized by the crowd and proclaimed ruler, he refused the crown and instead urged them to choose a wise Pole named Piast, who then became the founder of the Piast dynasty. Another legend places Jews at the center of Polish history at the end of the 9th century. According to this tale, a delegation of Jews from Germany approached Prince Leszek of Poland, seeking permission to settle in his lands. Leszek questioned them closely about Jewish law and morals, weighing their answers with care. Satisfied, he granted their request. Large numbers of Jews arrived, and in the year 905, they were said to have received written privileges, documents later lost to time. These stories are not factual in a strict sense. They were created centuries later and embroidered with imagination. Yet they carry a kernel of truth. They point to the presence of Jews in pagan Poland and suggest their German origin, even before Christianity reshaped the land. A decisive change came in the year 966, when Poland formally adopted Latin Christianity. This step bound the country not only to the German emperors but also to the bishops of Rome. Contact with Germany intensified. Merchants, clergy, settlers, and ideas crossed the borders in growing numbers, and among them came Jews. At first, this migration was slow, driven mainly by trade. But soon, a far more powerful force came into play. In the year 1096, the First Crusade erupted. Across Western Europe, waves of armed pilgrims surged eastward, fired by religious zeal. Along the Rhine and Danube rivers, Jewish communities were attacked, plundered, and slaughtered. In nearby Bohemia, crusaders fell upon the Jews of Prague, forcing conversions at sword point. Faced with violence from both the mob and the authorities, many Bohemian Jews fled toward Poland, a land not yet touched by the crusading armies. Even when Prince Vladislav of Bohemia robbed these refugees as they passed through his territory in the year 1098, the exodus did not stop. Life under open hostility had become unbearable. From this moment onward, a steady stream of Jewish refugees flowed into Poland from the German lands. Each new crusade, those of the years 1146 to 1147, and again in 1196, deepened the suffering in Germany and swelled the movement eastward. During the 12th and 13th centuries, royal authority in Germany proved too weak to protect Jews, who were legally classified as dependents of the imperial treasury but abandoned in practice to mob violence and church decrees. Faced with burning synagogues, forced baptisms, and recurring massacres, thousands chose flight over despair. Poland became their refuge. They settled first in regions closest to the German border: Krakow, Posen, Kalisz, and Silesia. There, Jewish colonies began to take firm root. Yet peace was not without strain. In the second half of the 12th century, Poland fractured into feudal principalities, each ruled by its own prince. With political fragmentation came social tension. In the year 1173, Prince Mieczyslaw III, known as the Old, ruler of Great Poland, was forced to intervene. Violence against Jews, especially attacks carried out by Christian students from church and monastery schools, had grown so severe that the prince issued strict orders forbidding such assaults. Those who attacked Jews were to be heavily fined. Despite these tensions, the rulers themselves largely recognized the value of Jewish settlement. Under Mieczyslaw the Old, Casimir the Just, and Leszek the White, at the turn of the 12th and 13th centuries, Jews administered and leased the royal mints of Great and Little Poland. Coins from this period survive, bearing the names of Polish princes written in Hebrew letters, a striking symbol of trust and cooperation. By the early 13th century, between the years 1203 and 1207, Jews were even recorded as owning land and estates in Silesia. As these communities grew, their ties to Western Europe deepened, not only economically, but spiritually. A contemporary Bohemian scholar, Rabbi Eliezer of the Tosafist tradition, tells us that Jews in Poland, Russia, and Hungary lacked learned authorities of their own. They therefore invited rabbis, cantors, and teachers from abroad, most likely from Germany, and paid them for their service. At the same time, young Jewish scholars traveled westward to study. From Germany, Polish Jews inherited their language, a German dialect that would gradually develop into Yiddish. They also absorbed religious traditions and communal structures. Yet all of this existed only in early, fragile form, still unfolding. By the 13th century, Polish princes began to grasp the full economic importance of Jewish immigration. Their lands remained largely agricultural, divided between landowners and peasants. Trade, industry, and finance were underdeveloped. Into this gap stepped the Jews, forming what might be called a third estate. They brought capital into circulation, leased estates,